Thank you for this opportunity, Sikhri, first and foremost. Ishmeet Kaur, and I've been working with Central University of Gujarat. What I am going to talk about today is something which is an interest, and it's been a kind of purpose for life, or one can say love of life at the moment. It's come out of an extensive fieldwork study for about 2 years, and it all started definitely with literature and went into studies of social sciences because it was not possible to study this subject without entering into social sciences research. So there was a kind of a shift which I, as a researcher, took from literature into social sciences. But today what I'm going to do in this talk, rewriting the erased chapters, Chaurasi, then and now, is another shift from socio-political studies back to literature. And as we go on, these things are going to be very clear. 84 and Chaurasi, which is the focus of the talk today, is one such event that has now become an example of impunity, an example of injustice. 3 decades plus and no justice. One event leads to another, and the manner in which an earlier event is treated, or the treatment rendered to the earlier event, actually determines the future. Whether in future such cases reappear, they may reappear in different forms, they may reappear to different people, to different communities, but the way they've been treated in the past is going to determine what happens in the future. Therefore, even a single case of injustice to any one person or even to one community threatens other communities as well. So as Martin Luther King rightly said, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Therefore, it becomes extremely important that we understand Chaurasi 84 in this light, where injustice is one of the most pivotal concerns today, 34 years after the event. When we talk of Chaurasi, when we talk of 84, we need to understand the significance of Chaurasi. And there are certain questions that we need to also ask. But before we go on to those questions, we actually need to define our definition of 84, our definition of 1984. And why is it so important to the Sikh community? 84 has a larger extended definition. And that definition takes it to a time period that actually begins from late 70s and extends to post-90s. But today's lecture is specific, particularly to the happenings that happened in Delhi, and it's focusing on Delhi carnage post Indira Gandhi, the then Prime Minister's assassination, and its aftermath. The violence that actually erupted on 31st October and went on till about 4th of November. And that is what today's lecture is actually going to focus on. And there are some important questions that we actually need to address in this context. And these questions are very important questions. And first and the foremost question is that why is it important to the Sikh community? Is 84 central only to the Sikh community? We're going to talk about it, but Definitely, it is one of the very important events, particularly for the Sikh members. Um, from 84 and November 84, or in order to understand November 84, we need to return back to June 84. June 84 was one of those black days in the Sikh history where there was an attack on Harmandir Sahib. And one thing is for sure, that it is not possible to read the present in isolation. We need to return back. We need to understand our contexts. And in order to understand those contexts, we need to read around what was actually happening. In this slide, historian Ajmer Singh has done a lot of work, and he started writing a book on 84. And then in his introduction, he says he realized that it was not possible to understand 84 without referring to 47. So he started writing a book on 47. And then when he started writing on 47, he said it was not possible to write on 47 without understanding or without talking or without referring to the Sepoy Rebellion, the mutiny in 1857. So finally, he wrote on 1857 and he returned back to 1857, and from there he came to 47 and then to 84, and then he wrote the fourth volume, which was about the present situation in Punjab. So how do we understand 84 is a very, very important, very crucial, very complex, and a very extended study. Mutiny could also be one of the reasons, probably, that opposition did not act critically in 1984 when the Sikhs were being attacked, when the Sikhs were being attacked by the Congress. And Congress had its own reasons, but definitely not justifiable. But what were the reasons for opposition's silence is one important question which we need to sort of address. Why did the opposition not condemn the attacks? Why did the opposition did not speak at that particular time? And what happened to people? And it is also significant to the Sikh members also because the memories recast themselves on the individual's mind. Even though memory fades in public memory, but it continues to grow more and more within the individual minds. The individual struggle is something which keeps the memory, keeps the past on, at least till people are alive. And 34 years down the line, the impact of 84, the impact of what happened to the victims and to the survivors has continued to impress itself upon the survivors' minds. So survivors have never been able to get rid of what actually happened to them. And happening was in the past, but in the present, the wounds could not be healed also because there was no justice done to the perpetrators. So there was no healing, there was no sense of, healing, or there was no sense of connecting to others. And there was a kind of, pushing the community to the corners. And this sense of being isolated, this sense of being left alone, was something which was somewhat very traumatic to the community itself. The second question is a very important question because on one hand we talk about the focus being laid on the Sikh community and how the Sikh community gets affected by the killings in 84. But did it also have effect on those who were not the Sikh members? Did it also affect, is it also significant to people who are not the Sikhs? And this question is also a very important question because with 84, the community gets transformed. The association which the Sikhs had to their Hindu brothers, which earlier saw mixed families, somehow the elder brother from a Hindu family would be the Sikh. And now there was a kind of separatist identities. And even within the dynamics of language, Punjabi Hindus were sort of taking towards Hindi and Gurmukhi, and the Sikhs were largely taking to Urdu and Gurmukhi, and there was a kind of a divide which was kind of widening. So one important thing that we need to understand is that the separatist identities begin to not just evolve but also widen, because evolving of the separatist identities had already happened earlier, when 47 was a very, very important event for that. It's also significant to those who are not the Sikhs is also because history repeats itself. And if today it has happened to us, the Sikhs, tomorrow it may happen to somebody else, and which did happen. Because 84 could not produce examples of justice. 84 could not produce examples which were hard enough for people to understand. And 84 could not produce examples to perpetrators that, look, this is not the way it should be. This is violation of human right. It repeated itself in 2002 and in many cases post-2002. And over years, we see that mass violence has only grown. And all of us are living in a very volatile world. Cases of vandalization, of lynching are on the rise. Therefore, we must understand that any such event, particularly 84, is just not Sikh-centric, because it has its impact on other communities too. Also on the non-members. So it becomes very important that we understand these impacts. In fact, some very interesting cases evolved where some of the members of the community who were associated to the community because they had married Sikh men, particularly women. And one important case which came to notice was Professor J.P.S. Oberoi, who was a Delhi University sociology professor. His wife was an Australian citizen. And her entire life sort of changed after 84. And her daughter did make a family documentary, which is titled as My Mother India. And she talks about how 84 somewhat changed her mother's life, and how everything changed about them, and how the community had undergone a transformation. And the impact that the family had was very important for them to register. And this is a kind of an extended impact, and how Safina's or Professor J.P.S. Oberoi's wife, Patricia Oberoi, becomes somebody who goes off as, or who's not identified, or who remains as an unnoticed subject. But definitely there is an impact. And how do we actually account for such people? So it does not mean that 84 or such events have an impact only on the community to which it happens. It has an extended impact to other people too. And questions like, what do we remember? And that's a very, very important question. I mean, actually, what do we remember? What is there to remember? And there's so much to remember. The important things are definitely the event, the killings, all that happenings, the manner in which the people were attacked. And there's a lot done on that. there's a lot already done, but it's still not sufficient. More needs to be done. We do understand, or what we need to remember is also how a set of people, people who belong to a particular community were also victimized, and how from the image of bravery and valor and chivalry, one is reduced to a subservient position of somebody being more vulnerable. But more than that, something very important, and important in the present, 30 years, 34 years after the event, is how did we recover? Because recovery is a very important aspect of these events. How have we continued to be, despite all the attempts at extermination of the community, despite attacks on the youth, despite the attempts at disrespecting or humiliating the women, how did we evolve? Also, have we really evolved? And I would say, yes, we have evolved. And if we have evolved, then how did we evolve? I think those stories are very promising stories, and those stories are stories which give a new face to the entire question of 84, to the entire concern of 84. And that also talks of, and it also gives a position to people who can assert their being. Yes, we are. And there may have been a large number of failure cases, but there are cases of success. Despite the fact that 84 becomes an example of impunity, of justice being denied, but people came up, people evolved, and the number of people sitting outside the court shouting slogans, waiting all their lives for justice, fighting for justice, is a kind of a journey in itself. And what could have been the strength which sort of led them to do so? And they still did not give up hope. I do remember when we went to collect our oral narratives in the Widows' Colony at Tilak Vihar, Delhi. A woman was not at all happy looking at us holding cameras and moving around, and she said, these people keep coming up with their cameras on, and they do nothing, and we are sick and tired of giving them our stories. And when the other woman said, maybe sometime, maybe somewhere we might get something, and she said, I'm going to tell you my story. I'm hopeful that something will happen, something will emerge. At least till I'm alive, something is going to come up, and I'm going to tell you my story. And that was it. And that was a point of recovery, particularly for that woman. And she gave us a new hope, and she said, I have a story to tell you, and you need to keep that story, because yes, people must know these stories of what happened to us. We may not be there, but these stories are going to live on. And that was a moment of recovery, and that was a moment of that woman asserting herself that you may try to finish us off, but we live on, and you cannot really, we will not perish with your doings, and we will continue to be. And this continuation of being is something that we need to remember. And this is exactly, and when we move forward from what to why, it's very important to look at this why. We need to remember, particularly because it is very important to revoke. The synonyms for revoke would be to repel, to abrogate, to nullify. And we need to nullify the hate crimes. We need to stand against the hate crimes. We need to revive from the past and to stand up in the true spirit. In the true spirit of the path that was taught to us by our gurus. And that path has been a path of sarbat ka bhala. And since this has happened to us, we cannot afford to forget it. Now we will not forget it. We will remember it so that it does not repeat to anybody else. We will learn from our own examples, and then we will think about, or we will find out means where it does not repeat. And if it repeats, then what are the measures which we are going to take? Our experiences are going to be our examples. And when we talk about what do we need to remember or why do we need to remember, then something important also emerges. How do we need to remember? So we need to think about methodologies of remembering. We need to think about the ways in which we will remember. And one of the methodologies in this lecture particularly, which I'm going to take up, is actually, I'm going to restrict myself to apparently 3 methods. And I'm going to make a slight shift from approaching the subject socio-politically. I'm not saying that I'm going to ignore that. I'm saying I'm going to just make a slight shift from looking at the subject socio-politically and focus on more linguistic and maybe literary modes of representation, literary modes of remembering. And in this attempt, the first thing that comes to us is that with 84, with Chaurasi, there is the rise of a new vocabulary. And we witness that this new vocabulary is very semantic. It has a lot of meanings in it. Chaurasi, the word in itself, did not remain only 1984 for us. Chaurasi in itself became a very standardized term, which now began to denote pogrom as a fixed site of memory. So Chaurasi was no more just, a year in the calendar, but it became a very important happening which had its space within the minds of people, and it fixed itself within the people who had witnessed it. And often during formal or informal gatherings, people would commemorate Chaurasi. I have my small fragmented memories of my parents visiting family and friends and then talking about where were you during Chaurasi, what happened to you, and was there any loss of life, or was there any loss of materials? And then people would talk about these happenings, and therefore people would commemorate Chaurasi, and they started assessing the loss both in terms of life and materials, and then they would sympathize and empathize with each other. And this coming together of community, coming together of the experiences, what people shared with each other, was something which made them also go on. Even during the field visit in the widows' colony, the widows retorted, and they said, if I wept, my neighbor also wept with me. My friend, my people all living around here, we all wept together, we all laughed together, we all emerged together. And when I thought that my life was burdensome, I looked at her life and I realized that if I had lost 3 members, she had lost 6. And the number multiplies. So from 3 to 6 to 9 to 12, and it goes on. And she says, every time I looked at the other case, I realized that my suffering was probably lesser than her suffering. And this was kind of a collective understanding of the trauma that made these people recover, that made these people go on. The second term which I choose to talk about in this new vocabulary is also the difference between dange and rola. I don't know if it makes a lot of sense, but dange, as it apparently came out, was kind of immediate. Though later on we also contest the differences between riots, pogrom, genocide, carnage, and we talk about whether Chaurasi should be called a riot which is more accidental in nature, or should we call it pogrom, or which is kind of pre-planned, carnage which is kind of pre-planned, or should we call it a genocide which is an attempt to cleanse, one full community. Rolla in 84 was a kind, sorry, Rolla in 1947 was kind of a word where everybody participated. So it's not directed on one community alone. So people came up from all communities. So if Hindus were killing Muslims, and if Hindus were killing Sikhs, Sikhs were also killing Hindus, and Muslims were also killing Sikhs, and Sikhs were also killing Muslims, and Hindus were also killing Muslims. So, it's a kind of, it's not very specific. These binaries of Hindu Sikh do not work in the Rolla around 47. The majority minority dynamics did work, but not as neat as it was there in 84. The next word, Sardar, became very prominent, and Sardar was a word which also underwent transformation. And in this sense, we could see the transformation of the whole community. So earlier, when Sardar was known for his valor, for chivalry, for bravery, for somebody who was a protector, now Sardar was being seen as anti-national, as a betrayer, as probably a terrorist militant, and the entire definition had kind of, the entire image had kind of undergone a transformation. Words like Bal, Kesh, Kada, they were the identity markers, and people were being spotted and killed with these identity markers. So these words also became a part of that vocabulary. See, if any of these people are wearing kada, and in some of the films they've shot, they identify people, even if they have cut their hair, they identify with them with the kada that they are wearing, and then they say, why are you wearing a kada? And then they say, oh, you belong to, look, your hair are cut so shabbily, so you've just cut them, so you are a Sikh, and then that person has been killed. So this also became a very important part of the rising vocabulary. And then another word was Sikh kebab. And Sikh kebab was kind of a joke that went around, that how did you kill the Sikhs? So they said, we killed the Sikhs like you fried the kebab. So it became the Sikh kebab, or the Sikh kebab. And later on, very recently, about 2 years back, Kuljit Singh wrote a play called Sikh Kebab, and it's a tragic comedy around this name, this word which spread around like the Sikh Kebab. And that was a kind of a new vocabulary. And then definitely we did need to understand the differences in the words like riot, pogrom, and we could not term Chaurasi as a riot, and it had to be understood as either a state-led pogrom or a carnage, which could be genocidal in nature. But again, we need to discuss this more. The title that I have chosen for today's talk has a word called erased, and this interestingly is if we just ignore the E, we get a sense of raised, and razor has a double meaning to play over here, and erased, of course, is erasing something, like rubbing it off where you don't want that thing. So that's an intentional act of rubbing off what you don't want. Therefore, it's a kind of a forceful forgetting. Okay, we are going to forget them, we are going to ignore them, we are going to neglect them, so we remove them. Or if I give some benefit of doubt, maybe there is some shame, so we don't want to remember our own shameful acts, therefore we just slide it away. And the other meaning that emerges from is of shaving off. And you tend to shave off the very idea of shaving off people's hair, cut off the hair of the people, which was their identity marker. And the very reason they were known as Sikhs was because they wore turbans or they kept hair. So the first attempt was attack their turbans, cut off their hair and shave it off. And this was specific to 84, where identity was very significant, and people were actually located with these markers, and then they were attacked. In fact, this picture that we see here, this man probably is being rescued now, and he's been already beaten by the crowd, and his hair have been shaved off. And his expressions on the face are very painful expressions. He is in dire, and he's actually very scared at the moment. And but the emphasis here in the picture is actually on his hair, which have been cut off. And even in the play Sikh Kebab, Kuljit Singh has somewhat very beautifully charted a character who's a very, very irritating character. This character is completely bald, and in the play he's not wearing a shirt, and he's continuously shaving off hair from his body. Symbolically, this character is obsessed with the idea of having hair on his body, and he's so scared, he thinks that if he keeps hair on his body, he would be killed. And therefore he maybe the character does not speak any words, so maybe he might be under a kind of a psychological depression or whatever, but he is so kind of scared, and he's obsessed with the idea of removing his hair. So there's this idea of shaving, which also comes up with the idea of removing or removal. And in this second picture, we look at a man whose turban has been removed, and a policeman is watching him in the background. And it doesn't seem that the policeman is rendering any kind of a help to this man. And we do not know what happens after this picture is clicked, whether he was beaten again or was he saved, or we really don't know. But there is a policeman standing, and what's happening really don't know. But the here again are prominent, because that's what has been the identity marker. And this is a picture of the burnt houses and property of the Sikh victims. And so the attack was, so the people were identified. There was a kind of a voters list, and from the voters list, the houses were identified and they were burnt. And this was a kind of a colony where all Sikhs lived, and this is what came of it. In fact, when we talk about remembering, or when we talk about these methodologies, when we return back to the methodologies, the individual accounts themselves are also testimonial. Unfortunately, when the state has failed to do justice, the generations who experienced firsthand are also passing away now. And it is important that whatever is left, it may be sort of preserved, it may be recorded, it may be kept. There hasn't been any kind of formal recording of the events. Yes, we have a couple of archives, we have a lot of people who've done some kind of a work, but when I say formal, I also mean institutional. And some of these testimonies which are available, because in 2000 people were asked to file their affidavits to Nanavati Commission, and they rewrote their accounts. Many of these testimonies were these were like designed testimonies which were ready-made, and these testimonies had a very structured language where they said, okay, after Indira Gandhi was assassinated, we were killed. These many people were killed in my family, and I bared a loss of about materials of about ₹1,00,000. And people were made to sign on those ready-made testimonies. But we did find a couple of affidavits where people said that no, we were given ready-made testimonies, we were given ready-made affidavits, and we said we are not going to sign on that, so I am going to write my account. And when that person wrote his own accounts, he wrote about 4 to 5 pages, full-length pages, where he described what had actually happened. Also, probably many of these people who belonged to lower economic classes and who were not very educated could not have written their accounts, and therefore whatever was being read to them, they just signed on those accounts. So these testimonies also need to be approached with a kind of a doubt, apart from those which were written by people themselves. So therefore we do not have any institutional recordings of what had happened. So what we have is more important, and those are the first-hand accounts of people, and they themselves, these accounts become testimonial. These narratives, or these experiences of people are actually heart-wrenching. The survivor narratives unfold these tales of suffering, these tales of pain, and the awful experiences which are full of shame. And one thing is evident, that these experiences or the perpetrators did aim at insulting the community. Safina Oberoi, she also worked, and she's the same person who made this documentary on her mother. She worked with children in the camps. And in one of her interviews, she recalls how a child drew only patches of yellow color. So the color when the child was using, like when the child was drawing, and the color which the child was using was the yellow color. And on inquiring, she was told that the girl actually held her father's hand when he was burnt alive. So she saw the skin burning and melting, and thus she always drew the yellow patches. And later on, after many months, the girl began using other colors and other figures, and that was the time, when recovery was actually possible for this particular child. This picture is a picture of 11 death certificates. A woman whose name was Shakuntala, she lost 16 members of her family, and out of 16 she has 11 death certificates, and rest she gave to the close members of those people. And on inquiring, when we talked to her and we asked her if she was getting any kind of help from the government or any other body, and we did know that Delhi Sikh Gurdwara Prabandhak Committee was giving 1,000 rupees per death per month to the survivors. So somewhere we thought she would be getting around 11,000 or 16,000 rupees per month. And she was so furious when we asked her, though we asked her very nicely if somebody was helping us, but she was very angry, very agitated, and she said, what am I to eat, from my dead? You first kill us, you first insult us, and then you give us compensations. I refuse to take even a single rupee. And her husband was running a very small sugarcane shop, and he was very scared to speak. And he said, give us justice, don't give us money. And this family saw a very sad event where Shakuntala's sister-in-law was burnt alive, and she was burning, and she asked for water, and a man came and he actually urinated in her mouth, and two men came and they ripped her legs apart. And Shakuntala is extremely traumatic when she narrates this, and it casted a very, very deep image in our hearts. We sort of closed our cameras for the day, and we also went back home, and we just couldn't register what she had told us. And her husband talks about his mother. His mother used to keep money in her salwar, and the mob, people from the mob ripped her salwar off, and he saw her mother running naked. and but he was too scared to speak. And when we thought we could speak to their children, he simply asked us not to approach them. And then he agreed that we could talk to them, but then he said, okay, we could not record them. So we did not record the children. And one of the families, I won't name the family, but their daughter-in-law said that they had never celebrated Diwali ever. And she was like that she had gone through a lot of trauma with the family itself. And then there were incidences of rape, and Attar Kaur somewhat said that how the entire evening the women were being raped, and when women were falling on their um, children, on their girls, and trying to dress them, throw dupattas on them and cover them, their clothes were being torn, and in the evening they got candles and they continuously went on raping the daughters, the daughter-in-laws. There is a site of memorial which these widows in Tilak Vihar Widow Colony have installed in Gurdwara Shishganj Sahib. They call it Shishganj Sahib. This is not the historical Gurdwara Shishganj Sahib, but this is a Gurdwara which is there in the widows colony. And they brought in these pictures of the people who were killed, and they put in all these pictures together. And there's so many pictures, but the space is less, and there are many pictures still lying down in piles which cannot be put. When we look at these pictures, the women come and they tell us, they told us, like, he's my husband, he's my husband's brother, he is my chacha, he's my mama. And then they would say, there are 7 people in one row who were killed from my family. There are 12 people here. This wall is my people's wall, and they were killed. And then you also see children of very small age, ranging from 2, 4, 5, 7, and they did not have pictures of these men. So they found out old records in offices, and they got passport photographs, and which some of them blew up and then got them here. And this is the real site of memorial as we actually see it. And when we look at the kind of justifications given by people, why this was happening, the state had its own kind of justifications. The state was looking at the Sikhs as promoters of anti-national activities. And Sikhs sort of began to question their sense of belonging. And there was a lady, Nanki Bai, whom Uma Chakrabarti had recorded, and she said her husband had kept a fast on the day Indira Gandhi was killed. He was a Congress supporter, and when people came to kill him, he said, oh, I am a Congress supporter, why are you killing me? And they just killed him too. And also the kind of rumors, and this is another part of the vocabulary, the kind of rumors which sort of spread at that time, that the Sikhs were celebrated Mrs. Gandhi's assassination by distributing sweets, and how Sikhs had poisoned water, or how trains full of Sikhs were coming from Punjab to take revenge. These were all kind of justifications, which people were giving to themselves, that, okay, because this is happening, so we could revenge, we could, kill them, and we could go ahead. So this is the role that the rumors sort of play at these events. At the same time, there is the other side of the story. So on one hand, where we need to remember what happened, we also need to remember that we are not promoters of the hate crime, and we have to understand exactly that there were other people too who had saved many lives. Nandita Haksar was a lawyer, and she was a human rights person, and she was also involved in the fact-finding team of PUDR and PUCL. And she was one of the main people who made this report, Who Are the Guilty? And she wrote for our book, where she talks about how she rescued with a team of 7 people who were totally strangers, who came together, and they saw a school burning, Guru Har Krishan's school burning near her house in Munerka. And they rescued people from the school, and they brought them to her house. And they all came together, and somebody made khichdi, and sent the khichdi to her house. And at the same time, there was an army officer who was wearing a uniform, and he said, you know, by bringing these people here, you're putting our lives in danger. And she said, you may go and save your life, but first and foremost, remove this uniform that you're wearing. And she went inside and she helped the people. And then she narrates how these community members, having been rescued, she thought they would make tea for them, and when they were making tea, she did not know how to prepare tea for 200 people, and they taught her to make tea by putting it in a dupatta, by putting the tea leaves in the dupatta, and they started laughing at her. And because Sikhs have a sense of community kitchen, so they all got together and they made tea, and there was so much of fun and frolic and laughter at that particular moment. And she said, I could see how the community was so much full of life, and they were all scared 10 minutes before, and now they had all found their jest and they were laughing at each other. And there was a child who was handed over to Nandita by one of the women, who said, you take my child and I'll follow you. And for a long time, the mother was not to be found. And how the entire community took care of that child. The child became everybody's child. So these accounts are extremely important for us to know. Karnail Singh talks about a Hindu rickshaw puller who used to work in their furniture showroom. He used to, he used to deliver their furniture to different places, and there was a phone, and those days they had landline phones. This rickshaw puller used the phone, and he kept calling up Karnail Singh's family constantly until the shop was completely burnt, and he kept telling them that a lot of the people have come, they put a cross on your glass. Now people have come, they're breaking the glasses. Now people have come, they're taking the almiras and they're taking the sofas and other things. Now more people have come, and now, they are throwing kerosene around. And after that, they did not receive any phone call because the shop was probably burnt. And this man was being a loyalist to Karnail Singh and family, where he was telling them this. We have a personal account. We were not in Delhi, we were in Shimla, but a veteran journalist, Mr. Randev, saved our life. He came to my father. We used to live just next to the Gurdwara, and he came and he told my father that nothing is going to happen to you. He went outside when he saw the mob coming, and he diverted the mob, and the mob had attacked the Gurdwara, and the Gurdwara wouldn't have been saved if Ravindran Dev would not have been there. And this is an obituary written for him, and maybe, if you're interested, you could read it up. And we as children grew up with examples that we saw, and we felt it was very important that we talk about what was the other side of the story too. But at the same time, there has been a lot of silence, and I would now come to the methodology of collecting literature. And when I started reading on 84, I was trying to look at novels, particularly in English, and I found hardly any work had been done. And I just found 2 or 3 main novels which were just recently written: Amandeep Sandhu's Roll of Honor, Jaspreet Singh's Helium, and Parvinder Singh Sandewal's Beyond Identity. These were the 3 novels which I found, and of course there was a translated novel written by Indira Goswami, but not much had been done. And then we thought it was very important that why weren't the writers writing? So we started addressing this. So is it difficult for the writer to create a character, or what was happening? And we started looking for answers. And there has been silence, particularly by the survivors, because it was very difficult for them maybe to return back to normality. Jyoti Garewal says that it has been very traumatic for the victims to revisit memories of trauma. So they walk away from these sites of recalling the past. And Amitabh Ghosh also kind of said that he could not write for a very long period because he said that there is a responsibility of the writer to write. And that responsibility was a very important responsibility. One wrong word could incite a very, very critical accident or a critical indenture to anybody around. So he took his own time to kind of write. On one hand, this is about silence, and on the other hand, silence is also the ignorance or the inability to address the shameful act, or sometimes even the nonchalant behavior. And when we sort of started collecting this material, we ventured on literature, and we thought we would collect literature because literature was a very, very powerful medium to elaborate on personal experiences. And literature also is testimonial in nature, because what a character could do, the character had the ability, or literature or fiction had this expansive quality where it could crisscross time. And I would tell you a couple of stories where, you know, this crisscrossing of time worked. One of the stories that we collected was a story unfortunately the book is under publication, so I cannot give the name of the writer, but I've taken permission to share the story. The story is a story of a woman who belongs to a family which experienced partition in 47, and they live under a great, they live on with a great struggle. They migrated from Pakistan, and then all their life they lived with a huge struggle, and this woman is a product of that struggle. And her child sort of kind of gets married, and it is 84, and she's newly wedded, and she's waiting for her husband to kind of come back, and the husband does not return. But there is also a child who is moving around locating his mother, and he can't find his mother, and he comes to this lady. So this lady houses him, and she's waiting for her husband to come back. Violence is over, the husband never returns, the parents of the child never return, and she is helped by a Gujarati neighbor who tells her to come to Ahmedabad with them, as this Gujarati neighbor is relocating to Ahmedabad. And they come back to Ahmedabad, and they come to Ahmedabad, where this woman has now adopted this child, and they're staying together. And she begins working, and she starts looking after the child. And then it is 2002, and the both mother and child shut the doors and the windows, and they sit cuddled in the corner. And this is where the story finishes. The other story that was written is by a South Indian professor. She writes about a riot that breaks in her city between Hindus and Muslims, and she writes about how the parents are waiting for the child to return back home, and his bus is yet to come, and they are not able to contact the school, and they're simply waiting. And finally the child returns, and what the parents go through is very traumatic. And later on, after the riots are over, the mother goes out, and she's going for work, and she sees a vegetable vendor who has a kind of burnt himself, and she goes to save him, where she is stopped by the other people, and they tell her that he is out of mind, and he's just enacting what happened to his daughter and what happened to his wife, and don't save him, let him go. And she goes, and she just cannot bear that. She goes away from there, and then a couple of years after, she is away on a picnic with her circle, and there they hear that Indira Gandhi has been assassinated, and violence has erupted in Delhi, and Sikhs are being killed. They pick up their car and they come back home, and that is where the story closes. And this is the kind of material, and this is where we see the crisscrossing of time and the ability which fiction is somewhat creating, you know, and this in itself becomes pretty testimonial. It's not a question of whether fiction is reality or not. The experience which the fiction is kind of registering is reality. And unlike history, it may not be linear in time, but it addresses much more than history can do. And there is a kind of consciousness building that happens through literature. So new generations who have no idea of what has happened in the past, when I talk to my students and when I tell them about 84, and when they saw the play Sikh Kebab in the university, that is the time they said, oh, even this happened. And our children get a sense that, okay, this is a subject on which I need to work because I am the insider here. And this is also kind of emancipatory. Once one writes, there's a kind of a healing that happens. And similarly, so we went to people and we said, write poems. There were some poems being written and we asked a lot of people to write many other poems. And one person who did write a couple of poems for us was a very young girl. We did get poems from veteran poets as well, but this girl was a very, very young girl who wrote a very interesting mail saying that I am an atheist. I do not believe in any religion. I do not follow any identity. But I have my mother's experiences to share. And she wrote about, centuries of clothing. And she wrote about how the long meters endorsed her father's head. And then she talked about how these long meters of cloth were being roped. And those were very interesting. And then this girl today must be just about 20, 21 years. And that time when she shared these poems with us, she was 18 years. I would also close with one of these poems which was written for this occasion and which is called Cracks on the Broken Door, which somewhat, crisscrosses the time again, which is November is the cruelest of all months. Memories of gruesome event on a cold wintry morning brings with it the same chilling shiver of 84. The cold, wicked hands of morning on the first day offered our people to wrathful mouth of the burning fire. The unerased memories, never let us forget 84, waiting endlessly for justice to knock at our door. Many years since Darji left in 47, the cracks on the broken door were never mended. 84, the termite and the cracks widen the gap. Our children we have lost to depression, madness, and distrust. Neglect has excluded us, and amnesia has struck us dead. We need to kind of have a kind of a summary statement, and I like to conclude by kind of giving a conclusion and summing up, this entire talk by saying that these experiences are not experiences which are particular to communities. It has an effect which is a manifold impact on everybody. And these incidences, first and foremost, are a matter of shame for the nation and its people where they happen. Secondly, that what happens to one community is reflected in future to also other communities. And there is a need to think about the kind of examples that we are setting, particularly for the perpetrators. If we do not do justice, then injustice, the histories of impunity continues to grow. Third, we need to revisit the institutional responsibility of the state as well as the community members. So yes, the police, the legal system, they've all not being able, they did not support at the time, and there's been a complete breakdown of machinery. At the same time, as community members, we also have failed somewhere. We were a thriving community. We could have done a lot to, if we were not being able to give justice, we could have at least rehabilitated our own people. We could have done a lot. We could have built schools for these people, and we could have taken care of their children. But somewhere we have also ignored them, and we need to identify our weaknesses at the same time. And we need to understand where have we gone wrong. And fourth, there is a need, that is the point that there is a need to revisit the self. Even though we have lost time, a lot can be done even now. So I would like to close at a positive note, maybe try to think about where is it we can enter now, where is it we can get back to our people, connect with them, and also maybe help them out with whatever is left even today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ishmeet. Thank you for sharing with us your research and doing this presentation. I would just like to take this time to send a reminder to all our attendees that they can send us their questions along with their name. And if they'd like to verbally ask any question, please confirm that you have a microphone and we would be able to unmute you on the panel. So, Ishmeet, we do have a couple of questions already lined up. So the first question is, what kind of response do you get from non-Sikh students when you talk about this subject? And this question is from Harminder Singh.
Yes, I think that's a very important question. In fact, a lot of people would be amazed to see that the non-Sikh students come up with a lot of great ideas. And I wouldn't say that they sympathize. No, they don't. They, in fact, extend a different kind of a responsibility. And they want to understand exactly what happened. And they begin sharing their experiences, if they have had, of being othered. Sometimes these are experiences of caste, sometimes these are experiences of being of minority communities, and if they are not of the minority communities, they do understand the gravity of the subject. And I would also like to share, when the play Sikh Kebab was performed live in our university, which is in Gandhinagar, there was a standing ovation to the play. And it was like kind of for almost a minute or so. And this is the kind of response which we have received. And also would like to share that a couple of our students who are not even North Indians for that matter, and then non-Sikhs, have taken up 84 as a subject for their research. Yes.
Thank you. Another question that is linked to this is, how do Sikhs need to react to Indian media saying that Sikhs should forget 84 now in the name of interfaith harmony? And this question is by Inderpreet Singh from Sangrur, Punjab.
Yeah. I think the only way we can react to this is by telling them that we cannot forget. And how do we counter media and tell them that we have moved on? Yes, we have moved on. And when I talk of these stories of recovery, I think these stories of recovery, I think as a community, we should come out with serials of recovery. We should come out with films on recovery, not just victimizing, but also recovery. And that is where we can assert our being. And whoever says forget, I think forgetting is not easy, and forgetting should never happen. You cannot forget. You can evolve, you can recover, but you can't forget. So the only way to counter media is by writing about it and writing stories of recovery. And then we can say yes. In fact, there's a paper which has been written on 2002 Godra, where one person has written about a woman who was a tea seller and how she gave witness for 14 children she had seen being killed in front of her. None of her family members were killed. She did not even belong to the same community, but she stood tall. And when papers of this sort are written, or when we write kind of articles of this sort, it is then that we can kind of counter media. Only writing can be emancipating. Yes, thank you.
And you have alluded to writing as a form of emancipation as well as recovery and post-traumatic growth in your presentation a few times. So we This is again a comment and a question from Harpreet Singh. He is commenting that he recently visited India and was disappointed to see that no one wanted to talk about Chaurasi. Even at Darbar Sahib at the Sikh Museum, there was no mention of 84. And then he's asking question, I'm not sure how as a community we can keep this memory alive. And I think you've visited this theme a couple of times. Is there anything more you'd like to say on that?
I could share my own experience. I will not deny what he's saying. Rather, I would agree and second to it, because when I went to collect material for my work, I have experienced a lot of indifference by the Indians. Some international institutes, the Sikh Studies institutes in India, have shown complete unwillingness to sponsor any of the seminars which we wanted to do on 84. One of the directors of an institution also said this thing when I asked her that, don't you think that, when I asked her if she had something to share, she told me a full story about her own experience. And when I asked her if she could give it to me in writing to be included in the book, she said, no, I've already told you. You write it yourself. And that was, and she said, I'm not interested in writing. I've told you, if you want, you can write. So there is a kind of indifference which we have experienced ourselves. I remember picking up books from the table of a man I will not name in one of the Gurdwara offices. He showed me a book and he refused to give it to me. And the person with me actually picked up the book and ran away from there, and we stole the book and got out. So, and the next day when we came back to that person, he had 100 copies of the same book. So this indifference is there, but then we really need to counter this indifference. We need to come together as a community, and we all need to do our kind of a bit. On one hand, if there is this indifference, on the other hand, there has been a willingness of the Indians to write too. My work has majorly been in writing, so I can talk about writing. When I was doing this book 84, the book is still going on, and unfortunately, if one also wants to talk about the indifference, I have not been able to find an Indian publisher to publish this book on anthology. But that does not mean that we are going to stop our work. We will do our every bit of what we can. Thank you.
For sure. And Inderpreet Singh from Sangrur has a comment on that. He says, attacks on other communities are on rise after 1984. The thing has made its place in the minds of people that they can teach Sikhs a lesson and can do the same thing to other communities, and it makes it much easier. So Sikhs of the Gurus have a huge responsibility, not only for their brothers, but also for others living in India.
That's a very beautiful and a very valid comment. Yes.
So thank you, Inderpreet Singh. We have another question directed by Amarjot Gill. He's asking, he's not in favor of asking justice. Still, people wish to have, and they have tried a lot. Rather than Supreme Court or asking government, it should be time to ask a real place. Sikhs own a political Takht, Akal Takht. We must have unity and ask there. Surely justice comes there. Why is that not an angle being explored?
I don't think I'm a right person to comment on that. There is a legal system. I mean, I would not say asking for justice, but justice should automatically happen. The legal system should give justice to people automatically. There shouldn't be a need to ask for justice. If things have gone wrong, justice should be done. So there's nothing about asking, but somehow we have not, I mean, our legal system has failed to do justice to our people, which is a very sad thing.
Right. And that was explored further in a comment where Harpreet Singh is mentioning that even in Amritsar, there's very few stories that one can visit, especially in museums, about 84. And so how is our community reconciling with their storytelling means to talk more about 84 and seek that justice in their own means if they decide to? We have another question.
I think the most powerful site, memorial site, is the site which the widows themselves have constructed for themselves. So others would collect all kinds of stories and they will bring in their own political interpretations of it. So the most powerful site is the first-hand site, no matter how modest it is. But I think that's the best site of memorial one can ever see or visit.
And thank you for sharing that story and pictures from that site with us, Ishmeet. We have another question from Mandir Singh. The question is, why the opposition party was quiet during the 1984 is because it was not a political event. The dividing line was religion, and Congress just happened to be in power. We would have had the same result if another political party had been in power. So do we need to look at it from a political context? Is the question.
I think yes, opposition party has a very important role to play. And unfortunately in our country, there's always been a community divide. And now a lot of people are kind of writing that the Hindus did help the Sikhs. One can't deny that fact. They did help. And now the opposition says that many of these Sikhs were the RSS people who helped. So I don't know how true is that. But we need to look at, the very fact that even the opposition was silent at that particular point. We need to look at why was it silent? Why didn't it condemn the government for this act? And it's not so simple to call it a kind of individual impact, because somebody's mother was killed, or the Congress party leader, or who's the prime minister was killed. Therefore, it was an emotional reaction to that. All of us know it was not just an emotional reaction to it. It was a triggering point, and definitely we need to question the opposition over this. So why after 34 years or 30 years the opposition is saying that we did come forward? Where were you for all these years? Mm-hmm. And we do have lawyer H.S. Fulka, who stayed for a very long period with BJP, but then he shifted to AAP party, primarily because he lost all hope that he thought they would help him get justice, but nothing happened from there too. And I think these things become very clear when we actually read historian Ajmer Singh. Yes.
Exactly. Thank you. We have another question from Harminder Singh. And he's asking, what would it take to bring Chaurasi into history textbooks in India? Are there any efforts currently in place?
No, not that I know of. And it may take a lot of time, but we could bring Chaurasi in certain university syllabi, and it would come back. It would come in. I mean, it would, particularly in research and in higher education. It is there. People are talking of it now, but school syllabi, I have my doubt.
Right. Well, another way to look at it is scholars or academics, especially in post-graduation, as you mentioned, who are wanting to conduct more scholarship on Chaurasi. Who is supposed to be funding them at this point? Where can they look for funding?
Yeah. Yeah, funding is another problem because in India, people are still not much open to work on violence, and and particularly Chaurasi. And like I've been working on Chaurasi, the focus is on Chaurasi, which is not very welcomed. So I'm kind of told that I should take a lot of other things, 47, 2002, and talk on a more generalized kind. I should do a more kind of a generalized study. Many publishers whom I approached, they said it was too specific, only on 84. So that was another reason they did not want to publish the work. Um, so these are certain things which we need to evaluate and we need to think. But yeah, postgraduate studies and higher studies do open up a scope of reading Chaurasi and getting them in the syllabi. Yes.
For sure. Well, thank you so much, Ishmeet, for sharing and indulging us with our questions. We have one last question before we close, and it's from Inderpreet Singh, and he's asking, is there anything that needs to be done to record and preserve these memoirs before first-hand resources and witnesses of this genocide are gone forever?
Yeah, I think there is a lot to be done. One is that we need to find people. Delhi, still some work has been done, but Bokaro and Kanpur have gone ignored. I don't think a lot of people have created archives of these two other places which were badly hit. So they need to be recorded, they need to be preserved. And the other thing which I feel is also important along with these recordings is also think as a community in terms of how to facilitate education to their children. So the kind of at least if one generation has been killed or has undergone psychological trauma and has taken up to drug addiction or other things, maybe the new children of these families, the grandchildren generation, if we can save them, it will be a grand service. I think we need to come up together as groups and work in these areas, and that is something which needs to be done. Yes.
Indeed. And that's actually wonderful closing reflection on as we move forward as a collective Sangat on Chaurasi is also taking ownership on what we can do today. So thank you. Thank you everybody for your questions, and our apologies to those whose questions we were not able to address due to time constraints. We are clocking in towards the end of our webinar. You're more than welcome to ask us those questions on our Twitter handle or Facebook page, and we will sure post our replies. Please be reminded that these webinars are provided for free, and there's a cost associated with its technology and administration. If you feel that you have benefited from this particular webinar or others in the past, please consider making a donation to Sikhri or becoming a webinar sponsor. More details can be obtained in a follow-up email you will receive by emailing info@sikhri.org. A reminder everyone, please wait a few seconds for a link to appear on a follow-up survey. Your feedback is extremely important to Sikh Research Institute, and we appreciate your time that you'll be putting into that feedback form as well as to this webinar. I'd also like to extend a huge gratitude to Ishmeet Kaur for her e-Sangat today. So on behalf of Sikhri, I will end the webinar here. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.